Hello, Missladypetal here. After doing the tutorial on a letter journal, I thought I would do a tutorial on how to approach doing pages in a letter journal, and a good idea that I did not create but I thought would be great particularly for international journals. So I'm working on a particular letter journal at the moment, and the ladies who are in this journal, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you a sneak peek, but it's a really good technique that I wanted everyone who's embarking on letter journals at the moment to actually think about how to approach a page and what you could use. And so I think that that's an exciting thing. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to the middle of the page. And I've decided that I'm going to use this beautiful old world map, and I've just printed this out. It's a free image on the internet, and I've just printed it out. And when I do international letter journal swaps, I love to put in a world map and mark where I live, and then I put a stamp, an Australian stamp, somewhere on it. And I like to encourage anybody else who's doing international swaps with me and gets one of my journals with one of these atlases in it to actually do the same. Mark where you live on the map and then put in a stamp from your country in it. Okay, I'll put that aside. So I've got another page here, and I'm going to pre-gesso this because I have a plan that I'm going to draw on it, but I just want to seal the page because I'm using a really old book page and it's got a flip out, so it's going to be like a tip in this letter journal, which is really cool. It's one way to kind of add a little page without adding the bulk of the page. And this one, I'm just going to get a little bit on a credit card and just scrape the lightest coating of gesso on this surface so that it looks just that little bit mottled. But what it'll do is put enough on it, put enough gesso on the page to actually soak into the page and provide a little bit of sealing, just a little bit, and a mottled background. Apart from it will dry really fast, it gives you a bit of a mottled background to work with. But see, I'm actually going to draw a little pretty girl on this. Okay, now since the last time I've actually drawn one of my little pretty girls, and now I'm ready to colour her in, and after that I'll have a look at what sort of colour I want to put on the background and how I want the page to kind of turn out. I've got a particular saying in mind, but it's not really firmed in my head yet. Now, I've got some gouache here, and I'm definitely going to give that a bit of a go. I'm going to look for one of my finer brushes. Sorry about that. My family always decides that they want to interrupt me in the middle of something. And with the gouache, I'm going to blend it. So I'm going to put just the tiniest amount. And this is pretty new. So the gouache hasn't blended properly at the top. So I'm just going to blend all those bits there together. And I've got a sepia that I'll just pop in there just for some shading while those gouaches are wet. And I'm just going to apply them with a wet brush rather than mixing water into them. I might actually use my watercolour brush. So I just have a basic watercolour brush. Just going to get some water coming through to the nib. Beautiful. So I'm actually going to start in with a watered down shading first. And I will definitely blend this out. But gouache, unlike watercolour, is far more opaque. And so we can just use it and blend it. And don't forget, I'm going to put a flesh colour over this. So it's going to look pretty good by the time I'm finished. And because you've got that constant flow of water, you get this instant blending effect going on. And it can soften the lines of any of the shadows that you make. And I'm able to do this because I've got layers of collage on this now. And so I'm just not putting a lot of colour, not dumping a lot of the colour on, and then just blending it out just to give a little bit of shading. I only want to give the hint. I don't want to make it so that there's huge features there, and I want to make sure that the shadows that I am putting in, you know, can be blended and such. So just light washes all over, and I'm leaving the part around her nose because that always catches the light. So you always got to be mindful of your shadowing and how it works for you. And this is, I'm just adding that gouache in there just because that's the part that we often have. You just put that in, and she's got a little bit of a shadow going on there. And we do need to do the same thing here in her neck. So we bring that shadow down and blend it out. And with the gouache, it just kind of, be aware that it does blend into paper. So you need to get your initial coat down and then blend out and get rid of that line with washes. I'm sorry. I've decided that I can't film anymore when my kids are home. Honestly, I'm sure this little part of the video is a little bit disordered because I was filming and then my kids were like, really, Mum, we need you, and my phone rang, and so now I'm doing this in a very quiet place. And I just have decided that I'm not going to film when there's people in the house anymore. I'm sure we've all had problems exactly just like that. I've just got some leftover paint from another project that I'm just going to pop on some leftover cardstock that I used for a watercolor painting in another journal. With this journal, I didn't realize that the camera had turned off, so I've done the gouache. I'm probably going to put another coat of the flesh tone gouache over the top of this. Now, if you don't know what gouache is, it's like the poor cousin to expensive watercolor paints. But it is more opaque. So watercolor paints are translucent and gouache is not. And I love the fact that we can do, I bought it because I'm going to do, I'm getting into drawing and painting fairies, and I'm interested in how Linda Ravenscroft does that, and she uses gouache for the face because quite often she'll paint her background and completely cover the fairy, and then she needs something opaque to be able to pop over the top of it. So it's important that you think about all those things when starting out with products. Little tubes of gouache aren't that expensive, and the main colours that I don't have that many of them. I've only just started looking at them, which is interesting because I am a watercolour artist, so so okay, there we get into that. Alright, so I've got a little palette, and I love the thing about watercolour paints that you can just reactivate them. So there's the flesh and the which colour is it? It's raw sienna in the gouache. And these gouache, they're quite large tubes, and I do tend to use them. I've got the white, the raw sienna and the flesh, and I've got a burnt umber as well. Those are the colours that I use to blend in faces most often. And I'm just getting a little brush. I often just add a little bit of water to my palette in a separate little well here, so that I can have clean water and I'm not using my dipping water. So that I think that's often very important. Okay, so in this face now, she's looking pretty fleshed out, lovely. And all I did was use just that little bit of raw sienna to do the undercolouring, and then I've gone over with just one coat so far. And I just need to reactivate this gouache. There it is. We don't want it too watery. And I can do this watercolory type thing over the top of this because it's got an old book page and then it's got more collage over the top. So the page is now a little bit thicker. And I can just add in another coating of flesh just to finalise the beautiful colouring in the face. I'm loving this. I'm loving these gouaches for painting faces. I don't know. They look to me like they dry matte. Obviously, gouache dries matte, but they just dry the way that and look more alive. That's the word I'm looking for. They look more alive and realistic. But you can still see the music underneath. So I I really just love the effect of that. And she'll dry. That'll be pretty quick. Now, one thing I'm going to do here, I often use Delusions inks. So I'm going to actually use a little bit of gouache in a little bit of the raw sienna, but some burnt umber. So I've got some burnt umber here. So that's I'm wanting her to have darker hair, and I'm wanting her to have just that little bit of purple in her hair. So I'm only putting a tiny bit out on that palette, and I'll just go into my water palette here and just use it a bit, because I don't want it to be, I just want it to be kind of streaky. So with the hair, I kind of don't, it's better to layer and to just give a little bit of realism, because if you think with your hair, it's never a block colour. And I've got and see, you can see it just bubbling a little bit, but it's got these kind of beautiful, and I'll get a smaller brush and I'll do those finer details. So it's more the streaky details that I'm wanting. Oh my goodness. See, you can see the mistakes that people make. Just let me get some flesh and easy fixed. Pretty bad. I always freak out a little bit. Well, no, not really. Although you want your letter journals to be just lovely. I'll just use a little bit of that flesh because it's going to form like an undertone here, and blend a little bit. And if you then go against the grain with your strokes, make sure. So I'm liking the look of that so far. That's one of the things that's just gorgeous about gouache. I'm just going to add in some tones here with the raw sienna, because they won't have a lot of impact, but what they will just flesh out any additional colour in. You just see that she looks like she's had a set of foils done, or has some natural variation in her hair and some natural highlights without just kind of blending that. And I'm going to let her dry. I haven't thought too much about the background yet. I have a saying in mind, but I'm just going to let her dry, and I'm just going to have a look at I have a little journal as well that I'm starting with my 4-year-old niece. So this is the journal that I'm going to send to my 4-year-old niece. And she's kind of really excited. I've got some deli paper circles here. I've got lots of blank pages because she's local, right? I've got some elements from some Happy Mail from previous letter journal swaps. I've got a jelly printed page and then some smooshing over the top. And I've got some awesome rainbow striped tissue paper, and I kind of think that I might start writing, because this is lined, and this could be a writing page. And then the addresses on the back. So every journal I do is actually really different. All of these I'll be posting off today. Let's go back to this gorgeous little girl. Alright, so she's dry enough that I can now get out, I'm just going to use a much finer brush, like quite a thin brush, and reactivate just a little bit of Delusions ink. Delusions works very well with watercolour. And I'm just going to take, I just took some of the water off my brush. And I'm just, when this dries, it will just look like gentle highlights. Because I'm using it thinly, it won't look overpowering. And then we'll be able to say she's like Claudia. And you can always blot if you think something is, using these kind of water-based colours. So I'm just adding some colours, and then I'll go up to the face a little bit and blend them in a little bit more. Because of course you can do that. They're not colour fast. So any of these colours that you start off with, you can blend a bit more. I'm kind of liking the effect of that. And I'll do some long strokes now just to get that continuity in the hair. Not enough for it to be really overpowering, and like I said, as that dries. So I'm now going to use a white gel pen just to whiten her eyes. I'll just bring that in a little bit. Okay, so we're going to whiten her eyes, just to make her stand out a little bit. When that dries, you won't see too much of the, it'll kind of just give a real pop. And I'm thinking to myself, what little piece of, I've just got a gel pen or a pit marker, and I'm just going to pop in the tiniest amount of eyeshadow here, just tiny. I don't want to make it too overpowering. And I think to myself, well, what will I do the eyes? I have done some blue-eyed girls lately. She's looking warm. I might do brown. I have a brown pit marker. So I might just do some strands like the iris for the first start, and then I might go over that with a gouache, and we'll see how it interacts with the pit. You can always use your black marker over the top, so don't mind if you go over your black. It's always advisable. Okay, she's looking more real. I also redo the eyelashes and eyebrows and everything like that. And I need to do her shirt, so I'm thinking that I'm going to use a Delusions, or I could use blue. Actually, I've got a really pretty blue. Got a really pretty blue here, so we might use that. And I'll just put that layer in now, and it's going to affect all the collage underneath differently, and I'm leaving it a little bit wispy. So I'm going to make it dark over one side and blend that out with water, but I'm just laying down the colour at the moment. And I'm just going to move some of that colour with some water. This is just really simple. I may do other mediums over the top of this, but I'm just building some colour around this area. Just to give a little bit of definition. Might darken this all up, because it's still not as dark as over the other side. And it's interesting, you've got to be understanding of how the different absorbent your different papers will be. But part of that is I like the look of it, the changeable look of it, and I'll just compensate for that a bit. I'm quite happy with how that's turning out so far, and I have to let that dry again. I'm going to just get a really fine, tiny fine little brush, really fine, has a really fine tip. I'm going to paint in the lips, and I'm going to use again some of that Delusions. And I don't want very much water on my brush, not that this brush tip can handle it. And I'm just going to outline them now. And remember, this pigment, so I'm just laying pigment down with not a lot of water. So now I'm going to clean all the pigment off it and just have a little bit of water on it. And I'm now just going to blend it out, and I will go over these lips, so then we can get a few highlights in the lips as they dry. And I don't know if you can see that. Let me just zoom it in a bit. So you can see that there's a little bit of a highlight in the lips there. I don't think too much about it, but I definitely do think about it. So I'm just going to let all that dry, and then I'll be back and show you how I finish off this. Okay, so my girl's dry, her lips are dry, her eyes are dry, everything's dry. So before I go any further, I'm just going to zoom in, and you'll see me working on the black. So even in her hair, I just redefine some of the black, just to give it a little bit of definition. I'm going to get a finer kind of 5.5. This is a 0.8, so a 0.8. I'm going to get a 0.5 if I can just find that. Sometimes I even use a black ballpoint marker because it just gives a finer kind of flicked edge. Here's my 0.5. And I'm just going to pop in the eyelashes and see how it gives that finer edge. And I always do mine. And look, always this eye is never as perfect as the other. It's just the way I roll. And I often do a few just at the end. Not huge. And she's finished. So that little girl is now finished. And so I'm going to approach the rest of the page. So I've got some beautiful collage elements here. The girl is blue And I'm thinking I'm going to start with a base coat of yellow. And I'm going to make it like a real kind of lovely buttery yellow. I have this gorgeous... Oh, and I have this beautiful apple green, which is just will blend with the yellow. I have this beautiful, just cheap paper art, opaque. It's called Sunflower, and and you can just put it on. I use it for jelly printing a bit. I'm just going to spread it across the page. Because I'm wanting to have that lovely background. A little bit of the green and then some white. So I'm going to start off light here to begin with. I'm just getting my brush and wiping it on a rag so that I can just work with this paint. Not wanting it to really obscure any of the background at all, just to blend with it. And just go right down to where my beautiful girl is, right across the page. I'm liking that white there. And by the time you get to, don't do a hair until you've got a reasonably dry brush around the beautiful girl. And often then I just leave like a halo of lightness around her, because she's the feature of the page. And I like the idea that we just put just a tiny amount of pigment, but you pick these colours lightly first. Just a tiny amount of pigment, and you're drying it into the hair by now, because there's not much left. And that's the first part of that background done, and I'm really loving that so far. Okay, so I'm back, and this is not quite dry yet, but I've just gone over it just lightly in some Inktense. So I've got my new Inktense blocks, and I thought I would just try, because I found my beautiful quote, and I'm really liking it. So I'm just wanting to now add in a little bit, and I'm saying like a little bit of colour, but I want it blendable, which is what Inktense are great for. And it'll blend into the paint as well. I'm just wanting to then, I'll get into this water here and blend it out a little bit more, because I'm just wanting a general halo effect going on here. Nothing too spectacular. Okay, so you can just see that gentle halo. I'm just going to quickly dry it, because I really want to get started on this lettering, because I know a lot of you are doing your journals right now, and I wanted to try and get this out for you, and I've been a bit hampered by circumstances the last couple of days. And, you know, far be it from me that if anyone's waiting for this, that they don't do their letter journals. But you know what? I have faith in all of you that watch this. You're all such a fabulously creative bunch. And I'm just showing you a few bits and pieces on what I like to do. I do so many of these that I have a few signature things that I do. And if you ever get into a letter journal swap with me, then, you know, you'll certainly come across the sort of things that I do. Which is pretty cool. It's just about done. And so there's nothing really hugely strong there because I really love the fact that it's looking quite simple right now, and you've got the collage behind and nothing's really blacked out. So I've got this great quote. I'll just pop. I didn't, you know, I got my Intense blocks yesterday, so halfway through this. And the first thing I've done is sat down and done a colour swatch, and I've done it in dry and wet, and put the block numbers above it because there's no names, but the block numbers are on the blocks. And that's something that I'm using as, you know, because I can just look at that then and I know how it reacts to the paper. But my quote is, "Sweet is the memory of distant friends. Like the mellow rays of the departing sun, it falls tenderly yet sadly on the heart." On the Heart by Washington Irving. And that just resonated with me because I've got a lot of friends overseas. And in this journal, I've got friends overseas that'll be doing this journal with me. And, you know, I miss them. I wish I could go and have coffee with them. And we could see each other. And I have some fabulous friends in Australia that are they're just so precious to me. But I love the fact that through this exercise I've made friends. And I'm making new friends. I'm cementing old friendships. It's just beautiful. So I'm looking at, often when I do something like this that's quite panoramic, I will just draw faint lines across so that you can see where the lettering is going. Alright, so I think I've got enough lines there. And I just today got a new book on the art of whimsical lettering. So I'm just going to have a quick look. And I think it's really good to have a look and see. Yep, and I've already got an idea that I absolutely love. So what I'm going to do is pick out a few words that I'm going to do in big thick marker. Okay, so what I've done is I've picked out all the words that I'm going to do in big thick lettering, and then I'm going to use fine lettering or a fine liner to do all the other words. This should be interesting. It's good to have a play around with your words. And make them fit into your space. So I've got that, and that word won't end up staying like that. Is the memory. And kind of be creative about distant. Friends. try and think about putting capital letters in with lowercase and mucking around with different types of writing as you go. Friends. And understand also how your pens will go over the different mediums you've used. So if you've ended up using pastels, oil pastels on here, or even water soluble neocolors, you'll need to seal it before you do any writing. And then you might write rather in a brush pip pen rather than what I'm using. You can use a Sharpie. I'm using a Bic Market, so it's like a Sharpie. But I like the bullet point on that particular one better for what I'm doing at the moment. But you might really think about how you're doing this. You certainly wouldn't use a fine liner over anything oil. You'll completely destroy the nib the moment that it goes down onto that surface. So and so change up your words. You might surprise yourself about how awesome something looks. And so I'm not doing, you know, I'm alternating my large words in small and large letters. But I still want them to stand out. Tall, skinny letters look really good in this type of style as well. Of the And I like the fact that I'm going to have a big word over the other end of the page, even if it is just the one word. It kind of completes the balance. It falls tenderly. And it's about really creating interest even in your letters. And I'm right near the end, yet sadly. And then we make our last letter. And I always like to give credit to where the quote came from, so I'll put the name down the bottom. Now I'm going to let that dry before I go over those big letters again and before I rub those lines out. And I'm going to go and complete those off camera because I don't want this to be too long. And then I'll show you what the page looks when it's finished and just have a chat about it. And some further little tips that you can do in your letter journals. Okay, see you soon. I've rubbed out, I've just done a few little bits to finish off this page. And for me, I'm happy with the borders not being, you know, darkened. I like to darken my edges a lot, but I'm kind of liking the way this looks. And I'm happy to be able to send this one out. Now, if another artist in my group decides that they want to add some shading in and they want to add a little bit of words in and they want to add maybe some stamping in, that's something that I think would enhance it. And I love the freedom in this exercise that we could maybe do something like that. So I think it's exciting that we just do bits and pieces. And we have our journals, and I'm just going to put some light spots in her eye just to make her that little bit more realistic. I'm quite liking the way she turned out, and I've done all different types of writing on here, and I just like the variety of it. It looks, you know, a little bit funky, I think. And so there's still a tip in here that somebody might want to do that might actually go with the rest of that. So it's interesting to think about. Now, in the rest, you've seen it before, but I'll finish off. I've done a few pages and started and added a few bits of collage elements, made sure that I've done the front covers, added some things in, you know, and that is the way I'm going to send out my art journal. Some I do a little bit more in, some I do less in, but for this basic exercise, that's it. Alright, happy letter journaling everyone, and remember, learn something new today. It keeps you young. Ciao!